The best athletes in the world are headed to Singapore for the second stop on the T100 Triathlon World Tour, and this race is going to be tough. The men's start list is stacked, and we're already seeing stories emerge from the first race back in Miami. Can Sam Long close the gap up to Magnus Ditlev at the front? Has Alistair Brownlee learned his lesson from the heat? And can Jason West redeem himself from that poor performance? I'm going to preview this race, run through it swim, bike, run, who are the favourites, and make my picks. Let's go. How this is going to work is I've got the 20 athletes in front of me here, and I'm going to break it down, swim, bike, run, how I think the race is going to play out. Now, at the start of the year, the PTO signed 20 athletes to race across the series, but they only need to race 6 of the 8 races, so we won't see all 20 at every race. Now, there's a small exception to this, so athletes racing at the Olympics only have to race the 4 races after the Olympics. So we're not going to see Martin Van Riel in Singapore, but he has said he is going to race a race before the Olympics, and he'll be there at the next race in San Francisco. We're also not going to see Max Newman. We still haven't heard what's going on with him. We've just seen little sponsors being released every now and then. We haven't had any race announcement yet. He's already missed Miami and he's missing Singapore, so he has to race San Francisco unless he's going to lose out on some of his contracted money. Next, Rico Bogan. After Miami, he struggled in the heat a bit, decided not to race Singapore. He finished 12th there, maybe below where he wanted to kick off his season, but we'll see where he features at one of the next races. And finally, Mathis Margerier. He had a great race in Miami, finally got on a podium at a championship level race, and he's establishing himself as a real threat across this series. So with 4 of the contracted athletes not racing, that means we've got 4 wildcards to run through. And unlike Miami, it looks like they were specifically selected rather than just being on a straight roll down basis. Now, that being said, the first one we've got is Yuri Kulin, who is ranked 12th, the highest ranked non-contracted athlete. And he really impressed in Miami with that 4th overall, where he beat loads of the contracted athletes. He's starting to prove his point that he deserved a T100 contract, and he'll continue to get wildcards and beat contracted athletes. Next, we've got Kasper Stepniak. Now, 2023 was a breakthrough year for him. He had his first win, he booked his Kona slot, and he was 7th at this race last year. He's a strong swim biker, but he did lose a lot of time on the run in Singapore, nearly 10 minutes to Christian Blumenfeld, but he'll be in the mix from the gum. And then we've got Carl Smith, a real fan favourite, and he's been on really good form early in the year. He's shown he can make an impact at these races with 2 top 10s, and he's a really strong swim biker that could replace some of the firepower lost from losing Margerier. And the 4th wildcard is Mika Newt. He had a big injury to recover from last year, and he returned at this race back in August. He was struggling with illness, so only managed 12th, but he's one of the best young men in the sport, and he'll want to make a big impact in his first race of the year. Now, looking across these 20 athletes, who are the favourites that are jumping out? Obviously, Magnus Ditlev, after his win in Miami, he's going to be the firm favourite. He generally performs well in the heat. Even though this is a different course, he is the firm favourite to take this win ahead of anyone else. Next, Sam Long, obviously coming off his second in Miami. He just raced Oceanside, where again he finished second. I think that was a bit of a surprise. If you look at the position where he was coming in off the bike, it looked like he was just going to control that run and take the win. So slight surprise that Lionel Sanders got the edge on him. He's going to be carrying fatigue into this race, and that could bite him in these tough conditions of Singapore, but he's still one of the favourites to take the win. We've got to mention Alistair Brownlee. He's always going to put himself in a position to win the race. We'll just have to see if he's learnt his lesson from that explosion in the heat. If he can pace his run, he'll definitely be on the podium. And lastly, Jason West. Now, going into Miami, he was one of the favourites to take the win, and he had one of his worst bike performances ever. He'll have to turn that around pretty significantly in Singapore, but he's always going to be a threat to challenge for the win. Then we've got to look at some of the more outside picks. Obviously, Yuri Kulin had that 4th in Miami. He could make it onto the podium. Sam Laidlow, maybe if he hadn't lost that nutrition in Miami, he wouldn't have blown up so much. And then we'll see how the wildcards fit in. Everyone's thinking Carl Smith's going to be at the front of the race all day, and we'll see how his run goes. Now, before we jump into the swim and break the race down, we just need to look through the course. The swim is 1 lap, but there is an Aussie exit included. There are some really long straights that might just keep the group together. There's only a few turns round a couple buoys, so that's going to keep the group close, like it did last year where there was one big group of 17. Also, the heat is going to play a big factor. The water is almost 30 degrees, so athletes are going to be very cautious not to cook themselves right from the start. The bike course is 8 laps over 80k, and it's unexpectedly tough for what you'd think was an inner city bike course, and it caught a lot of athletes by surprise last year. There's around 800 meters of elevation with ramps on and off the highway, as well as some hills. Those inclines are going to drain the legs as well as the sweltering heat of Singapore. And it's a 3-lap run over 18k, and athletes will have an ample opportunity to see each other as they run out and back multiple times. And given it's an early afternoon start, it's still going to be hot when they get onto that run, probably over 30 degrees. And now for the swim. And how this is going to work is I've got these front pack, chase pack, second pack, third pack down the side. I'm going to split athletes up into these different packs of how I think the swim and the bike and the run are going to play out. So with the swim, obviously Aaron Royal, the strongest swimmer in triathlon, even though he didn't lead out in Miami. He had a bit of a tough day there, finished 10th after losing a chunky amount of time on the bike. Next, we've got Sam Laidlow. He blew up on the run in Miami after losing his nutrition right at the start of the bike. Maybe he wouldn't have blown up as hard if he hadn't lost it. We'll have to see. But he's going to be at the front of that swim, pushing the pace. Next, we've got Alistair Brownlee. We saw a bit of a change in his race tactics in Miami. He sat in a little bit more, hanging on to Margerier. He still ended up blowing up on the run, so we'll see if he deploys those sort of cautious tactics again on the bike at least. Then we've got Ben Canute. Not his day in Miami. He continues to struggle over this distance. And we've got Daniel Backergaard, another reliable performance from him. He's had 4 top 8s in a row at these PTO races. Next, we've got Javier Gomez. Injury ruled him out of that race in Miami, so we'll have to see what fitness and health he's got coming into Singapore. And then the last one in this front pack is Carl Smith, the first wild card, and he's someone that could pick up the load left by Margerier when this group exits T1. Now, this is definitely where I see a bit of a drop-off in the caliber of swimmer, but like I said, the course has some really long straights, not many turns, and that's generally where athletes can start to get gapped. With those long straights and the water temperature being so high, the pace might not be on. So this chase pack could merge with the front pack and we have a super pack like we did last year at this race. So the first athlete in this chase pack I've got is Rudy von Berg. He had an underwhelming day in Miami. He had a really poor swim by his standards coming out of Magnus Ditlev, so I'd expect to see him away from Ditlev in Singapore. Then we've got Kasper Stepniak, our second wild card. Swam front pack at this race last year, so expect to see him in this chase pack, probably latching onto that front pack. Then we've got Mika Newt, another one who swam in that enlarged front pack last year with Kasper Stepniak. Then we've got Jason West. He did swim front pack in Miami. He had the swim of his life there, but couldn't capitalise on it when he had that really bad bike performance. Then we've got Frederick Funk. This is his first race in the series after he's decided to skip Miami to focus on a bit more training. I'm interested to see how he's approaching this race. Last year he trained through the US Open and was focusing on 70.3 Worlds. So if he comes into this race and he's focused on it, we could see him challenge for the top 5, but it is still his first race of the year. Then we've got another wild card, Yuri Kulin. He showed he belongs in this series back in Miami, and he'll be looking to back that up again in Singapore. And then we've got David McNamee at the back of this group, and he'll be looking to redeem his DNF from Miami. Now, similarly, I see another drop-off in the caliber of swimmer here. So I'm going to put these into this second pack. But like I said, with those long straights and the water temperature, we could see all these athletes come together. But I think a difference to last year is Magnus Ditlev is here now. Athletes aren't going to want to come out of the water with him, so they could push that pace harder and really get out hard to break up some of these groups. First athlete in this pack is Magnus Ditlev. If he can hang on to that front group, it would completely change his race because he won't have to spend the first 20-30k chasing them down. but he's more likely to get dropped off that front pack and come out, like in Miami, about a minute down. Then we've got Peter Hemerick. He had one of the races of his career here last year, so this could get him back on track after his DNF in Miami. Then we've got Clement Mignon and Bradley Weiss in this second pack. They'll both be looking to redeem themselves after DNFs in Miami. Then in this third pack, we've got Sam Long. Like I said, he's coming off that race in Oceanside, so could be carrying some of that fatigue. He lost 4 minutes at this race last year, but he showed in Miami he can lose in the region of that time, still bridge up and challenge for the podium and even the win. Then lastly, we've got Leon Chevalier. He swam with Sam Long in Miami. I think he was a little bit disappointed with his swim, but I think he's still going to be in that group. He ended up crashing going through an aid station, but still ran relatively well off it with the 7th fastest split. So it'll be interesting to see how he can perform if he has a bit of a smoother race. Okay, onto the bike. And the big question is, who's going to replace that firepower of Margerier that caused that big break right at the start of the bike and sent him and Brownlee riding away from the field? Now, after blowing up in Miami, I have to assume Brownlee's still going to be cautious, but I think he'll want to push that pace a little bit and try and stay away from Ditlev. Sam Laidlow is normally aggressive on the bike, but he went backwards pretty quickly in Miami. Maybe he was building into the race after losing that nutrition, like I said, so we could see him be a bit more aggressive in Singapore. Now, Carl Smith could be one of the key aggressors and replace some of that Margerier firepower. He's been in really good form at the start of the year, so I think he's going to be a big threat on the bike. The question will be, is that enough by himself to cause breaks in the group, or are we going to see this big pack stay together? There are a couple other strong riders in these sort of front pack and chase pack. You've got Frederick Funk and Mika Newt, both really strong riders, but it's both their first race of the year. So they might be unwilling to sort of come out and take the race by the horns, and they might play some of the race dynamics and wait to see what gap they've got over Ditlev and save some of their energy for later in the race. So with that in mind, we may not see any big splits until Ditlev bridges up from the back. Even though Jason West had a poor performance in Miami, I think athletes at the front are still going to be motivated to try and get away from him. I think we're going to see Brownlee and Laidlow pushing the pace. Smith will be in there. Then I think you're going to have West falling back, McNamee falling back. Von Berg, he was poor in Miami, so I'm going to move him back. Gomez, we have no idea what kind of form he's in. He was ill and missed Miami. He's had several DNFs so far this year, so he's still an unknown, and I'm not sure what his fitness is going to be coming into this race. So I'm going to move him back and assume he gets dropped by that front group. Like I said at the start, Canute has been struggling, so I'm going to move him back. Then I think Royal, Bakkegaard, Newt, Funk, Stepniak and Kulin, I'm going to move them up into this front pack. They're going to be able to follow Brownlee, Smith and Laidlow unless they're really pushing the pace, which I'm not sure they're going to be doing. So we've had a bit of a break between the groups, this chase pack slipping back a little bit. Then we come back to this second pack. Obviously Ditlev is going to hit the bike hard, depending what his deficit is out of the water. Most people would predict it's around a minute. Now Ditlev caught the main chase pack in Miami just after 20k. Then he worked his way through it and moved to the front of it just after 30k. That gives us a good idea of how long it takes for him to bridge up to the likes of Royal and Bakkegaard. So we'll see him move through the field, probably come through this chase pack and make his way up to the likes of Royal, Bakkegaard, Funk, Newt within the sort of first 20-30k. He could find himself at the front of the race at that point, depending how hard Laidlow, Brownlee, Smith are pushing. If they've managed to splinter that group at the front, he may need to work a bit harder to get to the front of the race, but he is in a tier of his own compared to those athletes when it comes to the bike. Another name to mention back in the second pack is Peter Hemerick. Again, he struggled in Miami, but he performed really well at this race last year, so I think I'm going to move him up into this chase pack, and we could see him move even further into that front pack. Then coming back to this third pack, Sam Long, he's going to have in the region of 3.5 to 4 minute gap out the water. He's shown that's not too much of a problem. He can bridge up from those gaps. So he's going to start working his way through, and he's going to move through this second pack past Mignon and Weiss. So I'm going to move him just up onto the back of that chase pack. And then Chevalier, I think he'll start to bridge up to Mignon and Weiss. This is probably the standing around 30k into the bike. We've got our lead pack where Ditlev has bridged up to some of these weaker riders, and then it depends how hard Brownlee, Laidlow and Smith are pushing. I think Smith could be the one driving that pace, and then Brownlee and Laidlow will try and go with him. So it may take Ditlev a little bit longer to catch to the front, but if we fast forward to sort of 50k, I think Ditlev is going to have made that front group of 4, and then I think we're going to see Royal, Bakkegaard, Funk, Newt, Stepniak and Kulan, I don't think they're going to be able to follow Ditlev's wheel, and I think they're going to move back and become the main chase pack. So I'm just going to shift everyone down. So Roar, Funk and Newt, Stepniak and Kulan become the chase pack. We've now got this second pack of athletes and this third pack down here. So I think this chase pack will broadly stay together. The athletes might get spread apart a little bit, but this is sort of the caliber of athlete I imagine in this chase pack. From this second pack, you're going to continue seeing Sam Long ride through the field, and he's going to come on up onto the back of this chase pack. Peter Hemrick, if he's going well, will do the same. I think he'll continue to ride through. Javier Gomez, I'm still unsure. I think we could see him push the pace on the bike, so I'm going to move him up with Peter Hemrick off to the back of that chase pack. And then I think of these athletes further back, you're going to see Chevalier continue to move up and sort of establish himself in that second pack. Now back to the front of the race. Depending when Ditlev catches will dictate how aggressive he is on the bike. We saw in Miami, he didn't catch the front of the race until just over 70k. So that less than 10k isn't enough time or distance to put an attack where you're going to establish enough of a lead coming into T2. If he catches the front of the race with over 20k to go, we could see him try and break apart the field, get a lead coming into T2 and give himself a bit more comfort on his run. It'll be interesting to see if he can break apart that group at all. We saw Laidlow follow him in Miami, bridging up to the front, and Brownlee's ridden with him before, and so has Smith back in Ibiza last year. So he may struggle to break apart that field. I think the difference this course has, it's got those hills where athletes can surge hard up them and try and really sap the power of the other athletes' legs and cause some gaps. So we could see Ditlev use those hills to try and break apart the field. So I'm going to move Ditlev to the front of this group of 4. I think it could be difficult to break away from them, but given the lack of firepower left for Margerier, it's not going to take him as long to bridge up to the front of the race, and he's going to have more time to play with to make that attack. So I think he's going to ride off the front and get a bit of a lead, maybe 30 seconds coming into T2. And then I think Brownlee, Laidlow and Smith will all sort of stay together. Coming into this chase pack, I think Long is going to bridge up to the likes of Royal and Bakkegaard, and they'll all come into T1 within a similar time if they've all ridden well. Now further back, Jason West was one of the favourites we mentioned at the start. He's obviously going to lose time on the bike, but it just depends how much. Typically we've seen him at previous PTO races lose in the region of 3 to 4 minutes, at worst 5. In Miami, it was 7. If it is in that region of 3 to 4, he can still challenge to make the podium, and maybe if he has an amazing run, he can challenge for the win. But if it's over 5 minutes, he is out of contention. So he needs to see a significant improvement in his bike if he is going to challenge for the podium. And I think we will see that. I think Miami was a bit of an anomaly. I think he's going to come into T2 around 3 to 4 minutes back, and then he'll be able to get out on the run and challenge for the podium. So coming into T2, this is how I roughly see it. I think you're going to have Ditlev off the front, and then a group of Brownlee, Laidlow and Smith, maybe 20 to 30 seconds back from him. Then we've got quite a large chase pack here. There probably will be gaps in between them, but this is sort of the group I see riding and coming into T2 broadly together. Then further back, we've got West along with some of these other athletes onto the run, and it's going to be super interesting to see how these tactics play out. We saw Brownlee and Smith in Ibiza last year come into T2 and then gun it out on the run. They both eventually blew up and finished, I think it was 6th and 9th. So have they learned that lesson? They'll obviously be feeling good coming into this race. It would be super interesting if they just sort of mark Ditlev, let him set the pace, don't be too worried about who's coming from behind, and just go with him and see how long they can last and push him to make the move. Let him decide the pace and challenge him to be the one that dictates the race, because I don't think that's something he's used to doing on the run. We see him do it on the bike, but then on the run, he just likes to do his own thing. Now, it's easy to say don't worry about the threats from behind, but Sam Long is going to be there, and he is clearly the big threat out of this chase pack to move up. He showed in Miami that his run is in top form, even though it wasn't quite there at Oceanside, but he should be the fastest runner out of these chase pack. So I'm going to move him up. Yuri Kulan was also in really good form in Miami and ran just over 60 minutes there. So I'm going to move him up. Then Bakkegaard is ever reliable, so I'm going to move him up onto the back of this front pack. And then we'll see how Gomez is. He is a very good runner, but we don't really know where his form is. Then the rest, I think, will all stay in this pack. I think Stepniak struggled on the run here last year, so I think I'll move him back. And then of these athletes further back, I'm just going to take them off the board and focus on the front of the race. West is going to move up and start running through this chase pack, and probably just need to reorganize this slightly. So I think Royal's going to move back. Funk and Newt back. Gomez is a big unknown and I'm going to bring him back. And the same with Hemrick. West is in this chase back, chasing down Bakkegaard and Kulan. If Ditlev does have that gap off the front, I wouldn't be surprised if we see Brownlee herring after him to try and close it, but then I'd love to see him try and settle in and just run with him. Laidlow quickly went back on the run in Miami. Even if he doesn't blow up this time, I still think we'll see him go backwards. Smith has been in really good form this year so far, so I think we'll see him try and match Brownlee and stay in this front pack. You're going to have Long continue to push the pace and close up to this front pack. Same with West. I'm assuming he's had that better bike performance and he'll work his way through the chase pack and come up onto the back of this front pack. And now I'm just going to narrow this down to 8 athletes. Ditlev is the clear favourite to take the win here, but Long did put 2 minutes into him on the run back in Miami. So he's going to be worried about him coming from behind. And I think Long's going to continue to run through the field and challenge Ditlev for the win. I think Smith may start to drop back and we'll see if Brownlee blows up again. Those two could push each other and cause each other to blow up. And we're going to see West and Kulan coming up onto the back of this front pack and putting pressure on those athletes. Kulan ran really well in Miami and he'll be wanting to build on that and challenge for the podium here in Singapore. So I'm going to move Laidlow and Bakkegaard off the board. I think they'll finish in the top 10, but I don't think they're going to challenge for the podium. Then we're left with this top 6. How do I think this is going to finish out? It feels like the simple and easy pick, but I think Ditlev is going to take the win again. He's so strong on the bike and he just has too much of an advantage over Sam Long coming out of the water. I'd love to see him get pushed a bit more on the run to see what he has left in the tank, but I think he's the clear favourite to take the win again. And then it comes down to how much fatigue is Sam Long carrying into this race, and is that enough for one of these other athletes to capitalise on it and take that second place? I think I'm still going to have to back Sam Long, even after the slightly surprising result in Oceanside. And then I was extremely cautious about how I evaluated Alistair Brownlee going into that Miami race. I think given the lack of run training he had going in, he's now done a bit more heat prep, bit more training. That race builds fitness. I think we're going to see him challenge a bit further up and we could see him stick in the run a bit more. So I'm going to put him on the podium ahead of Smith, West and Kulan. And then in 4th, I think we're going to see Jason West redeem himself and run up through the field. And then I'm going to put Kulan in 5th to back up that strong performance from Miami, and Carl Smith in 6th. And you can see here I'm really expecting these wildcards to have another big impact on the race in Singapore like they did in Miami. So there we go. I've run through the race, swim, bike, run, made my picks. Let me know what you think down below. Thanks for watching and make sure you come back for the women's preview.